Hello, this is Valerie Moore from the Frederian Gazette. Thank you for joining us tonight for the first episode of Season 2 of Say I Slew Them Not. Written by Kingsley Montevello, edited by Alexander Phillips, and narrated by Pepper Holloway. If you've enjoyed our program and want to support independent journalism, please donate to our Ko-Fi at ko-fi.com/the Frederian Gazette and review our show. Reviews help other listeners find us. This program has been sponsored by Pierre's Hormone Starter Kit. Utilizing the most advanced science available, we've created a new formula that is 10 times more potent than generic hormones. Never has it been easier to control your own form. We now pass the mic to Pepper Holloway, who will be reading Episode 5, former Killbraughan President Caroline Galloway and Abolitionists Margaret, Leland, and Senator Devin Tossier agreed to work with the prosecution. Nairobi Page's journal entry, March 11th, 1876. I told Mustapha to stay in and rest. He's exhausted. I'll deal with Margaret and the others if they struggle to understand that he desperately needs to sleep before returning to the seemingly endless caseload. Patricia and Gerard, the hotel owners, lent us the adjoining room for half the normal price so Mustapha can work without keeping us up. Nazima asked Mustapha to keep his quote-unquote office door open even while we sleep. She says she likes to check on him during her late-night trips to the bathroom. The last few mornings, I've woken to an empty bed, and when I peek into the room, I see Nazima curled up in the bed and Mustapha scrunching his nose as he drinks an ice-cold cup of coffee. He assures me he catches several naps at the courthouse, but I don't believe him. Sleep has been a challenge for him since the war, and it is easy to justify staying up while working on a case this important. I'm considering getting him magnolia tea. Christine says the gargoyle markets are on the south side of the city. It might be a fun day trip for Nazima, and Mustapha will be grateful if we brought back good food as opposed to the bland meals the heathens called delicious. I helped him with his tie and ran my hands over his shoulders, satisfied that his suit fit him perfectly. It is so hard to find suits that sit on his broad shoulders correctly, and getting him to a tailor is like getting the children in our hospital to take their medicine. I seem destined to love and care for infuriatingly stubborn people. I intertwined my fingers with his, and we rested our foreheads against each other. He is wearing the cedar wood and lavender cologne I bought for him. I love the scent, even though Nazima hates it. She says it's too strong and too flowery. Mustapha usually responds by spraying the bottle in her direction, and she flees while giggle screaming. The kind that children don't seem to understand stops the heart of every adult within a 5-mile radius. Mustapha assured me he would be all right and that he needed to go because Caroline would be there. I thought she refused to testify, I said. And yet, she'll be at the dinner. I frowned. This was supposed to be a break from the trial and all its bullshit. Now it was a test, one that Mustapha didn't have the time or capacity for. I told him even more of a reason for him to skip and rest. He doesn't need this bullshit, and if she truly wanted to see justice done, she would have agreed to testify sooner. Would you have agreed to testify if Jordan running the prosecution? Of course not. He was an unpleasant, pompously didn't see scales or claws kind of racist shit. Mustapha kissed my cheek, knowing he had scored his point, and promised that he would excuse himself the moment dinner became too much. Thankfully, he'll have Winston to alert him when he's reached his limit. And take a nap, I told him, using my nurse administrator voice, one that even stopped Sam in air tracts. Might even spend the entire night in bed. That terrified me. It's nothing like that, he assured me. I was watching Nazima sleep last night, and I realized that Kingsley isn't worth working myself to death. That, and I miss waking up in your arms. That adorable blush spreading across his cheeks, still acting like a schoolgirl with their first crush anytime he says anything remotely romantic or needy. We should be on our honeymoon, he muttered, withdrawing in embarrassment. I brushed my nose across his and teased him that maybe we should send Nazima down and let her serve as our representative while we spent the night together. Tempting. But can you imagine the chaos Nazima and Devin would cause unsupervised? At that moment, Nazima, wearing the checkered light blue button-down and tan slacks she made me buy yesterday during one of our walks, jumped out of the bathroom calling for help. Mustapha's tie was wrapped around her neck several times. Mustapha bent down to help her and teach her how to properly tie a tie, and I regretted not having a portable camera with us. Nazima is going through a quote-unquote daddy phase. She has to do everything Mustapha does. I even walked in on her the other day, about to use his razor to cut her hair. We sat her down and explained that if she wanted a haircut, we could hire someone to give her a proper haircut and that she was never allowed to use a razor without our supervision. The next morning, she walked into the bathroom while Mustapha was shaving and asked if he would shave her. She even drew a fake beard on her cheeks. I'm still not convinced we did the right thing bringing her with us, and then moments like that happen, and I'm glad this trip is bringing Mustapha and Nazima closer together. She's still a bit standoffish with me, but that's understandable. She watched her mother die only 3 months ago. I fully expect we will have a complicated relationship given that I will never be able to, nor desire, to replace her birth mother. All that matters is that she always knows and believes that I love her, and I'm a safe adult to come to if she needs help with anything. If Mustapha and I hadn't had safe adults in our lives, we would not be here. I've only listened to a few of Alex's readings of Kingsley's memoirs, but I was surprised to hear that Kingsley was so young when he joined the ILA. It's an odd thought, but I can't help but wonder how things would have changed if he had had safe adults in his life besides Heron and Siegfried. Mustapha was almost terrified at the idea of adopting Nazima. Neither of us ever wanted children, Mustapha going as far as to swear he'd never have children when he was 16. I wasn't as adamant as Mustapha, but can anyone blame him considering who his father is? But I never wanted a child. I still don't want one, and yet I fought to adopt Nazima. Not that Mustapha needed much convincing. I think he fell in love with her the first night he brought her home and watched her interact with her dying mother. She is an adorable troublemaker, but what convinced me to adopt her was the knowledge that when her mother died, she would be sent to an orphanage. I don't know why the idea devastated me, as I know hundreds of kids end up in orphanages, and worse, every day, but the very idea nearly killed me. Maybe because I knew that Mustapha and I could spare her the horrors I experienced as an orphan if we put our own selfish fears and concerns aside and protect this child. Did we not owe it to those who stepped up for us? Nazima wasn't the kind of child who would survive in an orphanage. It would either kill her or dump her in the streets where she would be picked up by bastards who sold her until she was too sick to make money and then abandon her in a gutter to die. I don't know why we don't decriminalize prostitution. It would save so many people from the worst of the worst, but one issue at a time. I turned to Mustapha and I told him we were adopting Nazima. I know, he said with that little knowing smile of his. And then we fought the state. I understand that orphan children need to be protected from predators and abusers, but the amount of paperwork, invasive questions, and monitoring we endured only to find out at the last minute that we could not adopt Nazima unless we were married. If we didn't marry, then only one of us would be recognized as her legal parent, meaning one of us would have no rights in regards to Nazima's medical care, education, protection, or overall future. Mustapha and I have been together since before the war, and we've lived together the last decade or so, and yet we never spoke about marriage. His parents' marriage turned him against the institution, and I never saw the need to divide everything that is mine with another. Not that I don't love him, but that doesn't mean I feel compulsion to legally designate him as my heir to all my items in my future should I be unable to make my own decisions. In love, it masters of our own lives and everything in it, is how we explain it to most people. Now we are married and we have a child, and we're in Bearcassa, so Mustapha can condemn a known war criminal to hang while the church's unholy assassins haunt our every step. We're terrible parents. Actually, despite his worst fears, Mustapha is fantastic with Nazima. Sure, she tries his patience, and he has snapped at her now and then, but nothing unforgivable or irredeemable. Thankfully, she understands when I tell her he needs alone time. We haven't yet explained his bouts of depression and suicidal thoughts and tendencies, mostly because we don't want to overwhelm her. She's only known us for 6 months. She's amazing at reminding Mustapha to take his pills and me to take my estrogen shot. She was fascinated the first time I gave myself the shot in front of her and immediately asked if she could help next time. I'm not comfortable with letting an 8-year-old stick me with a needle, but I will let her help me prepare the shot and let her watch as I inject myself. I wonder if this is the beginning of a fascination with medicine. Mustapha says better than a fascination with the law. At the moment, she seems to help because she enjoys it, and I don't want to crush her joy, but I worry that she will soon believe it's her responsibility. I want her to enjoy her childhood. She's already been through so much, I don't want her to internalize that she needs to parent us. Nazima led the way as we left the room. Winston was torn between being glued to her side and remaining by Mustapha's. I've noticed that while Mustapha is still his primary concern, he seems to understand that Nazima is our primary concern and needs to be protected as much, if not more, than Mustapha. I wonder if he sees her as a rambunctious puppy who refuses to listen. As we exited the elevator and headed towards the hotel's restaurant, Nazima, quote-unquote, quietly pointed out the disguised Abolitionists. She got all but 2. I hate that we have to teach her how to identify a piece of shit in the drabbest of civilian clothing, and his revolver still visible if one knows where to look, but it could save her life someday. We knew we'd have to do this if we brought her with us. They're here, not just because Mustapha is the lead prosecutor in Kingsley's trial, but because we are heathens of the Idnis Desert variety, and because we used to smuggle demons into Ferdern, back when it was illegal for demons to resettle in our homeland. We never admitted it publicly, but the Abolitionists know. Devin was the first to rise and greet us. He immediately honed in on Nazima, he's always had a soft spot for children, and gasped, "Why, Mustapha? You shrunk!" Nazima giggled, and I knew she would want to sit next to him during dinner. Margaret grumbled that if Mustapha shrunk any further, I'd have to carry him around in my pocket. She tightly hugged Mustapha for a long time, whispering something that was most likely along the lines of, "What the hell were you thinking agreeing to this bullshit?" She turned to me and complimented my red dress and pulled me into an equally tight and lengthy hug. "You did the right thing coming with him," she whispered to me and gave me a small, sad smile as she pulled away. And I remembered that she and her husband had been inseparable rebels together, but only she survived with their son. For the briefest of moments, I wondered if that would be my fate as well, but squashed the idea. No, I won't even entertain the possibility. Winston licked Alex's and Christine's faces before settling next to Mustapha's chair. Christine was using her crutches, most likely because the restaurant wasn't designed with a wheelchair in mind. After Alex and Christine greeted us, Devin and Margaret introduced Caroline Galloway. I don't know much about her except she's a famous cartel. She helped Christine, Virgo, and Mustapha's mom survive the war, and the previous lead prosecutor tried to bribe her to testify against Kingsley and she refused. Meeting her gaze, I instantly understood she was Killbraughan's matriarch, similar to the wise women of the Nomusa tribe, my people. I'm still trying to understand my people's traditions. So much has been taken from me when I was displaced from the Idnis Desert. I don't regret anything because if I hadn't been forced out, I would never have met Mustapha or Nazima, but I mourn what I don't know about myself, my parents, my people. Mustapha feels similarly, even though he's wary of returning quote-unquote home because of the way the Alcahun Republics court him with the hunger of a starving hyena. I don't want Nazima to have the same regrets or lack of knowledge. Another problem to solve after this mess. The elderly matriarchs of the Nomusa were the memory holders of the Nomusa people, memory they share through storytelling, through their very bodies, and together as a collective. Caroline felt like a memory holder. Killbraughan's history intertwined with her past and carried in her body, withheld until now, potentially because she never had the proper training to share what shattered the hearts of an entire people. Caroline offered her downturned hand in greeting, her black, heavily laced dress both engulfing her and making her feel unbreakable. She speaks softly, not because she is shy or reticent, but because she knows it's the best way to get people to shut up and listen. We sat down, and as predicted, Nazima sat down between Devin and Alex, who she seems to enjoy terrorizing because she finds his exasperation hilarious. I think that is something she picked up from her short time spent in Mercury's presence. Neither Mustapha nor I are sure what to make of that or how much time we want Nazima to spend around Mercury. I love him, but the entire family is always surprised that he's still alive whenever he shows up at family gatherings. Not the kind of life I want for Nazima. The first half of the conversation was blessedly light and friendly as we all indulged in the fact that we were old friends who had been through horrors together and came out on the other side partially whole. Margaret gave Mustapha and I grief for meeting Sean Jr.'s boyfriend before she did, but we defended that it was a complete accident. We needed someone to watch over Strata's boat for us while we were in Bearcassa. Strata's boat. They gave it to Mustapha 3 years ago when his old age and heavy drinking finally caught up with him, and we still call it Strata's boat. And his boyfriend just happened to step out of Sean's apartment as we reached the top of the stairs. After getting over her outrage, Margaret asked if he seemed nice, and we agreed while admitting we only had a minute-long conversation with him before he awkwardly slipped away. "He's a minotaur," I offered, and Margaret twisted her snout. Devin immediately added that minotaurs were the gentlest of lovers, and then his eyes widened and his ears dropped in embarrassment. He immediately told Nazima that she didn't hear anything, and she replied that she did, and he told her to pretend she didn't, and she said that was dumb. "That's why I'm glad Amy is coming. I'm a complete menace without her," he admitted. I shared a glance with Mustapha and grabbed his hand underneath the table. Winston rose to a sitting position and Mustapha scratched his ear. Alex asked if Pip was coming as well, and Devon said yes, but only for a few weeks. Celeste wouldn't forgive him for leaving her alone with her pregnant son for more than a few days. The obligatory congratulations and questions about how far along he was, how he was doing, etc. Devon was incredibly proud, and it became clear that he desperately wanted to return to Ferdurn and be there for his great-grandson's birth, but duty trapped him here. Duty being Mustapha if Caroline gave him her blessing. Christine, maybe seeking to relieve the tension, maybe prompted by her voices, or maybe genuinely interested, asked Devon if he had told Sarah and or Jamal so they could add the baby to our wedding ceremony's guest list. Alex added his apology for missing our wedding and slyly added that they were looking forward to what Sarah and Jamal were coming up with. Right now, Mustapha and I are content to let the pair do whatever they want, as a second wedding ceremony is the least of our concerns. But I'll admit Alex's comment made me terrified about what we were going to come home to. The last thing Mustapha and I want is a large ceremony with hundreds of guests and a ridiculous amount of flowers, party gifts, and favors, and a ludicrously expensive location that would be covered by our parents, and yet, that was probably exactly what Sarah and Jamal were organizing. More teasing about our unwanted, extravagant wedding. Nazima growing increasingly excited as the table thought of more and more ridiculous setups and sources of entertainment. She seems to enjoy the absurdist humor and situations. The waiter stopped by and asked if we wanted dessert. I noticed Mustapha stroking Winston's head as the dog rested on Mustapha's thigh, and I wanted to say no, but Nazima's sewer-covered size, pleading eyes won us both over. We ordered her a piece of chocolate cake with ice cream and a pot of coffee and tea for the table. I don't know if the waiter had also been won over by Nazima's excitement, but when he returned, it was with what looked like a quarter of the cake. Thankfully, Alex interceded and prompted her to ask us if we wanted to share before she took a bite. We cut it up so everyone had a small portion of her slice, and even though Nazima initially pouted, she bounced back when the slice returned to her and it was still a decent size. I did not enjoy that Caroline waited for dessert before asking what she truly wanted to know. It almost seemed polite to wait until the end to ask the uncomfortable question, but really it was rude. She could have released Mustapha earlier if she just asked what she wanted at the beginning, or kept this dinner relaxing and fun and saved her questions for another more appropriate time. She started with a simple enough question: how were we enjoying Bertassa? Mustapha replied in his typically brutally honest manner, as much as being skinned alive. That won the approval from the cartel, while Christine admitted she still had a soft spot for the city, despite, and trailed off. Alex shifted and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I have many thoughts about what they did, but I'm glad to see they are trying to be there for Christine now, even if this is just a rush of guilt and won't last. Small steps. That's all we can do. Small steps. I was grateful when Alex interceded by saying that the tourists the trial attracted had certainly dampened what appeal Bertassa once had. Christine absent-mindedly and needlessly added, "The Azure Eye." "I found most of them," Nazima offered, acting young and innocent, but letting us know she could hear and she could understand. She is not as absent-minded as she wants others to believe. Mustapha and I will have to keep that in mind when it comes to discussing difficult topics with her. She's the kind of child who will find out what she wants to know, whether we wish to share that information with her or not. "Don't you feel special, knowing they're so concerned about your health?" Devon bitterly teased Mustapha. "Would be a pity if someone got to you before they could," said Margaret, and I know white-hot rage burst across my face because Winston switched to his alert stance, Mustapha squeezed my hand comfortingly, and Margaret's face fell. Again, I was grateful that Alex and Christine looked equally angry and upset. "Sorry, Nye, I..." "See, Margaret, this is why only the gorgeous can get away with saying stupid shit." Devon jumped in and rested his snout on his hands and fluttered his eyelids in an alluring manner. "Our good looks buy us endless goodwill." "I think he called you ugly," said Mustapha, shooting us a look that said it was fine. Margaret wasn't wrong, after all. Margaret reached behind Caroline and tugged Devon's ear. He play-acted seriously injured, and Nazima looked momentarily concerned before laughing and softly tugged her own earlobe, as if taking note and filing it in the back of her mind. She should know better than to try and tug on my ear. Caroline caught me off guard by asking if it was true Mustapha would be making a trip to Killbraughan. "He better not be," I immediately countered, staring at him the entire time while squeezing his hand until he winced, and Winston stood between us, nuzzling our hands. No, I'm busy enough here in Berkassa. He met my gaze, and I knew he wasn't lying, but there was something he wasn't saying. Something for later, when we were alone. Alex asked where Caroline had heard the rumor, and she said Killbraughan was a small country where everyone knew everyone. So there's someone in Killbraughan who is interested in meeting with the prosecution, said Alex. Why don't they come to Berkassa? They can't, Christine said so softly we almost didn't hear her. To enter Berkassa would cost them their life. To my surprise, Nazima pulled out a piece of blank paper and a color pencil from her pants pocket and handed it to Christine. Do you need a draw? Christine smiled and shook her head. Not right now. Thank you. She took the paper and pencil anyway. For later. Nazima nodded, proud of herself for helping. Alex said it was getting late, and I immediately agreed while Christine said she was all right. We settled our bill, the three Itatel paying for the entire meal, which was the least they could do, and Caroline offered to walk us to the elevator. We passed the Azure Canai in stony silence, and when we reached the elevator doors, Caroline took Mustapha by the arm and asked to speak to him briefly. I refused, and Alex said they actually had a few questions for Caroline, but Mustapha assured us he had a few minutes. He walked away with her, and Alex said they would wait with us. I told them no, I was okay, and asked them to take Nazima upstairs and watch for her for a few minutes. I didn't want her in the direct presence of the Azure Canai for longer than she needed to be. As I watched Mustapha talk with Caroline, Winston standing between them, I anxiously ran my fingers along the blades of the small throwing knives I brought in my purse. I'm not an expert by any means, but they're small enough and discreet enough to carry into most buildings, even the courthouse, worryingly enough. Mustapha held Caroline's hand in both of his as they bowed their heads in farewell, and he kept his quote-unquote friendly facade until we entered the elevator. I asked what she said as he slumped against the elevator wall. She had questions about what kind of evidence would be admissible in court. I think it has to do with her siblings' letters. Alex mentions she's preparing them for publication. She's considering testifying. I think they all are, he said as the elevator doors opened. His tie was already undone and off by the time I opened our hotel room door. About Killbraughan, he said once we were inside. I have no interest or plans to go, but we have received an offer from an anonymous source to provide archival information about Kingsley's role during the Demon War and the Second Shadow War. I asked if he would even be able to submit evidence from an anonymous source, and he said it depended on the judges. His team wrote the international laws to prioritize the protection of informers and evidence providers, so technically yes. He refused to accept any evidence he didn't know the source. I asked if Caroline knew who it was, and he said she had a hunch, but he refused to provide more information. All that mattered was that I knew he wasn't traveling without me or my knowing. I know confidentiality is important for the case and his informers, but I hate the wall it puts between us. We've worked so hard to dismantle all existing walls between us. Mustapha took my hands and said, Hey, I'm not Alex. I didn't run into this impulsively. We went through the most likely scenarios, we made plans, we're going to stick to those plans. We all know how reliable plans are. He assured me that he wasn't going to jeopardize his life or ours before even stepping foot in court. I forced a chuckle and he kissed my forehead before continuing to undress. I asked that if Caroline testified, she wouldn't stop with Kingsley, would she? He sighed no, and we both knew she would go after the real children of Hiva. Caroline spent her entire presidency demanding the International Court try the real children for war crimes. Her demands and pleas went nowhere. He sat on the bed and ran a hand through his tight waves of hair. I walked up to him and placed one hand on his shoulder and gently cradled his chin, forcing him to look up at me. You focus on Kingsley and nothing else. She wants to restart that fight, that's on her. He sighed heavily, and I know we differ on this. He still thinks that he can force the International Court to hold victorious colonial powers accountable. That's why he built the idea of war crimes and crimes against existence. He wanted to go after everyone, even while knowing there would always be those beyond the reaches of justice. I'm tempted to call Mats for support as we both agree that Mustapha wants to achieve the impossible. Mats keeps telling Mustapha to keep his head down and let the judges sentence Kingsley to execution for war crimes and then get the fuck out of Berkassa and let Mats handle the aftermath. I love Mats. I reminded Mustapha that he promised me it would just be Kingsley's trial. You resigned from the International Court for a reason, I persisted. I'll keep my promise, he assured me, meeting my gaze so I could see his sincerity. but I'm also going to lay the groundwork for another group of lawyers to use. Do you really think justice in a court of law will make up for everything taken from us? It's not about making up for anything. It's about ensuring it never happens again. That's never going to happen until we can hold entire entities and systems accountable. This could be how that starts. I pulled him into a hug, Winston circling around us, and told myself to let him be optimistic this once. It's so rare, and if it's the only way he can get through this, then who am I to take it away from him? As long as he is safe and we leave after Kingsley is sentenced, nothing else matters. We undressed and crawled into bed together. We kissed a bit, but Mustapha was too exhausted to do anything else, so he laid on my chest, wrapped his arm around my waist, and nuzzled his face into my neck. Winston laid down next to him. I held Mustapha close to me and kissed the top of his head as I soothingly ran my fingers up and down his back. It took barely a second before he fell asleep, and I took a cat nap of my own. I don't know what time it was when Azima and Alex burst into the room. Alex urgently asked if we were okay, and Azima leapt across the room and into the bed. She hopped up and down in excitement and smacked both of us with a pillow before apologizing, but I'm so excited! I tried to simultaneously hush Alex and corral Nazima into the other room, but Mustapha sat up and told me it was fine. Nazima dashed into her pajamas as I ushered Alex out, promising to fill them in on everything tomorrow. When I returned to the bed, Nazima was sitting in Mustapha's lap and holding a large book they'd been reading together during the last few weeks. She asked him to read to her, and I offered to read instead. Nazima pouted, and Mustapha convinced her I was an expert story reader. She huffed an okay and slumped into his arms. I think I got 5 pages in before they both fell asleep. Nazima sleeping on Mustapha's broad chest, curled up like a teeny kitten would when sleeping on their father. I'm now writing this entry by moonlight so as not to wake them. Winston has settled by Mustapha's side, with one paw intertwined with Nazima's leg. I wish Kingsley had had enough decency to kill himself and spare us all of this. I wish someone else had the integrity and courage of Mustapha and took this case on instead of him. I wish that he didn't have the kind of reputation that won the loyalty and trust of those in need. I wish we were home with Jamal, and Nazima could properly get to know her new large family and experience the childhood she deserves. I know it is important to fight for the world we want, but by Nazaket, it is exhausting and heartbreaking work.